excited to do this together again. Um, our topic is our topic is I can stop at any time. Probably, at least from my vantage point. Yet you're in the space, but that's the number one response that I hear from kids when you tell them, like, "Hey, knock it off. I can stop at any time."
Right.
So understanding dependency. That's what I was hoping that the parents can get away from our discussion, can as the takeaway, to understand what dependency is all about. Why kids think that they never have a problem, and how parents can communicate to them that they ought to be thinking about it when they're really typically not interested in listening, when they feel they have everything under control. That's all of it in a nutshell. Menachem, can you hear me? Menachem? I'm sorry, folks. We're having some technical difficulty. Please bear with us. What was that, Menachem? Sorry.
I lost you there for a second. I said I'm back.
Okay, great.
How long I was gone for, but I was trying to get back on.
We're perfect. Good.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, that's dependency is a word that you and I have kicked around a lot.
Yeah.
It's really like this, therapists, we love to play games with words. With good reason. Semantics kind of often make a difference, and people throw around, we've talked about how people throw in the word addiction, and it can mean, one of the challenges with addiction is that it means so many different things. I mean, it means dependency, but there's physical dependency and psychological dependency and emotional dependency. And when you start to unpack, when anyone starts to unpack their relationship with, let's say, a substance, you're really trying to unpack the level of dependency, or perhaps you could say unhealthy or unproductive reliance on a thing. So the title you had was, I could quit any time. But oftentimes it's not even so much about whether you can quit, but how much you're needy of this, or you're relying upon it to function. Because, part and parcel of human existence is a necessity to rely and depend on things, on people, on God, right? It's built into the cake. It's baked in the cake, as they say. It's just part of the journey for us to form attachments and create dependencies. But when you start to get into things like mood and mind altering substances, which oftentimes are more about fun or recreation than anything else, and then you start to develop these habit patterns of reliance upon substance, that's really where you start to open the door to what is a pretty dark and painful place of addiction, and it gets worse. So, and when we're talking about it in the context of young people, right, where say the dependency is not as obvious, as let's say adults, right? When you see an adult who's chemically dependent, in a significant way, it's very obvious. Their life shows it in so many different ways. When you talk about a young person, you're talking about really the beginnings of that, and the significance of where that substance is at play. One of the interesting things, and then I want to obviously give you a chance to comment, but one of the interesting things is when it comes to young people, the issue of dependence, which oftentimes is most related to addiction, you don't want to become dependent because then you could become addicted, but the issue of dependence for young people is much more complicated than addiction, because it even if they don't become addicted, that's not even the most significant thing to worry about. Meaning, the most challenging aspect of a young person becoming reliant and dependent on, let's say, something like alcohol or drugs is more about the loss of opportunity to develop vital skills and senses of self-esteem and senses of self-confidence that they can really only build effectively at this period of their lives. And if they're relying upon substances to cope with stress, anxiety, trauma, or just insecurity or impulse, then they never really have the opportunity. They don't give themselves the opportunity to develop things like autonomy and personal agency, which are so vital
Right,
for
sure, sure.
how
A successful life, a meaningful life.
right.
Sure.
You really have this like double-sided sword when you're talking to parents, you're talking to teens, like why not? Why shouldn't I drink? I mean, again, we're talking about like why shouldn't I drink on a particular occasion? That's a different story. That's
Right.
has to do more with danger than anything else. But why shouldn't this be a part of my life?
Right. Just for our audience, Menachem is the director of the living room. I've had the opportunity for 8 years over Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to watch him interact with the young men and women that he supports all year long. And folks, it is just indescribable, the respect, the affection, the deep trust they have in you, Menachem, is inspiring, and the kids are lucky to have you, really, author of 3 books. I look forward to reading Acceptance, I think, right, is the third one?
Thank you for, yeah, it's exciting.
I really look forward to reading it, Mitzvah Hashem,
yeah.
God willing. So what I wanted to do this year, different than other years, was for 25 years now, I've been telling parents why the kids shouldn't be drinking. You know, why it's dangerous, that why adults shouldn't apply alcohol on children, why the adults shouldn't apply alcohol on each other, because you never know who has a drinking problem in the shul or in your social setting.
Right.
But this year, what I've come to think about over the last, it's really a few years, but I don't know why, just more recently, because the kids have so much information, a lot of it wrong, but because of that swirl of information that's out there that they get from their phones and they get from each other, when the parents start telling them things, the parents get hit with these questions, like, is vaping worse than cigarettes? I heard that marijuana is much, much better than alcohol because nobody ever overdosed on marijuana. Right. You know, these are new elements, right? You know, pot, weed wasn't legal until whatever, the last number of years. And now the vaping and the hookah and like all of these other things, parents, as it is, have a hard time answering these questions. And I wanted to create tools for parents, encouraging them to watch this video and watch the video I did last night with Arnie. And Mirza Shem, I have Tzvi coming on Wednesday night, to watch these videos and watch it with the kids. I'd love parents to be able to sit and watch you and I talking together with the teenagers. You know, last time we talked, we got 3-4 of Nachman's in. So I was thinking while I was typing in the title, how can we get a Rabbi Nachman thought here? Right. Rabbi Nachman says that a dover that's not nishman muskabel, deeper is when we speak. So typically when I say something, forest fall, you know, tree falls in the forest, nobody hears it. Right. So Rabbi Nachman says that if your deeper is not accepted, if what you say wasn't heard by anyone and absorbed, it's a chasar, and it's lacking in the deeper itself. It's lacking even in the words that you're saying, because there's no receptacle, there's nobody to take it. Right. He ties it into Kabbalistic issues. But so like when parents speak to kids, that's what I was thinking of. You know, when parents speak to kids and give them, you know, good messages, hopefully, about this drinking space, and the kids come back with these questions. Yeah. And, you know, I just told Arnie last night, people in America can't even decide if the election was rigged or not. You know, you get different opinions about facts. So how can you expect parents to be able to guide kids when kids are quoting chapter and verse of things, again, that might not be true even, but the parents certainly, I don't think, have the tools to respond, the average parent. So that's one of the things that I wanted to accomplish, is to give parents the tools to be able to understand, so that from your perspective, what does it mean to become dependent? What could this drinking lead to, and how would they know if when they cross the line from just having a good time to being something that really could be dangerous to their future? Right. So those are the things that I really would like to gear it to. Imagining that we had some teenagers in the room here and some parents, and we were doing a talk with them, like what would we want to tell them that they need to know from your perspective? I'm asking, you know, I'm just asking the questions. I'm not an expert in this space. But I would love to hear your responses. How do you recommend that parents speak to their children, or you speak? What message would you give to kids. That's basically, that's the big idea. It's something I haven't done before.
Great. It's awesome. It's a great opportunity on this medium to talk about this. Something I've done a lot of times. I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of kids. One of the things that I think is really important as adults when we talk to children is to like really be, honest and not hide from
Yep.
the facts. Like I said earlier, like it's really important to highlight like some of the immediate dangers that are associated, let's say, with the misuse of alcohol, over drinking. Like I'll give you an example. So for example, if you talk to kids about the dangers of drinking and you go straight to drunk driving or like overdoses, people getting really sick. So for the most part, you lose them because what you're doing is you're equating like the most extreme example, right? Like what you're doing is you're describing why someone shouldn't overdrink, which actually the kids usually agree with you. Not all of them, but most of them will.
That's a good point.
That you shouldn't overdrink.
I never thought of it. That's great, Menachem. I never thought of it that way. It's very interesting.
So the danger of overdrinking is that you could get sick, you could do something really dumb. Your capacity to make choices is very limited. I've talked to many teenagers who got in a car with somebody else who was drunk because they were drunk. They would never on their own get in a car with somebody who was drunk. But like your decision-making is limited. The more you drink, the less likely you are to make good choices. So over drinking is problematic, and it's important to talk about that. One of the reasons we like shy away from that as parents sometimes, because it seems like if I don't equate drinking with over drinking, I'm saying that it's okay to drink, right? But I think in today's day and age, one of the most important things we need to think, for all the reasons that you described, is that our kids have so much information. So like thinking that we're going to not give them a nuanced perspective is kind of short-sighted. Like you have to give them a nuanced perspective. Well, will they understand it? Well, not totally, but if you don't give them a nuanced perspective, why would they listen to you? So we can both talk about the dangers of over drinking, and also I can tell you that I don't think that you should drink at all. And I'll tell you that, and I have good reasons why I think you shouldn't drink at all, right? But if I don't have good arguments for that, meaning if my only argument not to drink is the dangers of over drinking, let's say in this scenario, then I've made a bad argument and I can't expect them to listen to me. And usually that's because like I haven't really thought it through myself, right? Or because like that's the only answer I've come up with for myself.
Oh, that's what our parents told us.
or it's what we're not practicing ourselves when we drink.
Right.
Right. So,
right, exactly.
What do you expect? So like that's the only variable. The other thing that you have to really consider when you talk about a teen is to really try to put yourself in their shoes. Now, one of the funny things there is like you try to put yourself in a kid's shoes, like as if you can totally understand the cultural context of what they're going through. Like that you can't. There's too much. It's too much. But you could try to like visualize, to envision like what it's like to be in that scenario, to be a teenager, a teen in 2023 with all this information coming at you. Like you brought up a lot of good, bad choices to have to choose between: vaping, hookahs, cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, more illicit drugs, pills. I'm saying those are things. It's a very complicated smorgasbord these days that kids have to choose from. Even the way that they orient towards nicotine is a very funny thing. And I've talked to like younger people, nieces and nephews, like the way they talk about it is totally different than how, you're older than I am. You're younger than I am at heart, but like even in my day, we didn't call nicotine Nick. Like we didn't have to we just called it cigarettes.
We weren't on a first name basis.
Right. We called it cigarettes. Now it's like this whole like shift in orientation. And like, I remember the first time I heard a kid say that, like, oh, I'm doing Nick.
I'm doing Nick.
And I was like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. I was like, who's Nick? And what are you doing to him? Like, what's going on here? Like, I didn't know what was going on. He's like, nicotine. I felt like such an idiot, I'm supposed to like know everything that's going on. I was like, so like lost. But then I was like, so then I started making fun of him because I thought it was ridiculous. But then it's like, well, that's his reality. Like, I have to like shift my context and realize that the paradigm has shifted. And if I don't like try to understand his, let's say in that context, right? I'm sure you want to get back to the drinking, but like my experience of nicotine as a substance, which was almost like a side thing that the cigarette companies tried to pretend wasn't there, is now like very much the operative agenda. You know what I'm saying?
That's what they're trying to get.
They're trying to get the nicotine. I wasn't trying to get the nicotine. I was like trying to get cigarettes because cigarettes were cool because they showed it in the movies. Like the context has shifted. And then if I don't like try to understand that as a parent, as a counselor, as somebody who's trying to like talk to kids or you know, to try to live in their shoes for a moment, I can't possibly kind of speak to them. So those are like, that's like a really important point. Another thing,
Can I go back, Menachem, to what you said? Because I'm still, part of me is stuck there because it's so obvious what you said, but I never looked at it this way. I told you earlier, I have to catch up to your thinking. You think fast, you don't talk fast, you think fast. But what you said about if the argument is don't drink because you're going to overdrink,
right,
then you're saying that's a weak argument because the kids will instinctively say, I'm not going to overdrink. I just want to have a couple of drinks and enjoy myself a little and get loose at I'm in yeshiva for 70 hours a week. I got Purim. This is what it's supposed to be. I want to have a couple of drinks. I'm not getting roaring drunk. It's disgusting. I don't want to do that.
Right.
So what's the argument then not to drink responsibly?
Right.
So that's what.
Right. That's a good question, right? Which is a separate argument.
No, I'm saying like I'm wondering then. I think.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to validate the fact that making that argument about over drinking alone is a worthwhile argument, right? That I think people miss out on, right? When you're talking to kids, like even just saying like, let's put aside for a moment, like whether you're going to drink. I want to address your question, but let's put aside for a moment whether you're going to drink. Let's just talk about the dangers of over drinking and what you can do if you find yourself in a scenario where it feels like you are over drinking without me, let's say, like really coming down hard on you, because sometimes it's hard for a kid to like differentiate between if they are drinking, and this is not a commercial for them to drink, but
right.
Even if they are, sometimes they find themselves a little bit beyond where they'd like to be, and having a space in that moment where they've made a bad choice, where they know they can call their parent and say, hey, like I've really kind of gone off the rails here. I need a little bit of help, right? That's an important thing. But also talking about the other dangers inherent, which is like, just because you see your friends, having 5, 6, 7, 8, there's value in learning how to have 1, 2, or 3, right? Which there's a lot of research to support that, by the way, right? Which is like that kids drinking around adults in a very moderate level at an appropriate age is one of the best ways to teach kids about drinking.
Yes. Right. Is that so? I never saw. I'm not familiar with the research. That's fascinating.
There's plenty of research. It was an interesting research study I saw about children of, this is because this is in my field context. It was many years ago, so I don't know if I could quote it for you, but it was an interesting study. They talked about associations for adolescents whose parents were in long-term recovery from alcoholism.
Wow.
And the kids didn't have proper or healthy
role models to show them how to drink moderately.
Drink because it wasn't healthy for them. So they didn't have the capacity to learn those things. Right. So, which is an interesting study. So I think there's something to be said about that. And even like within Judaism, like there's giving somebody a little bit of wine in a moderate way at the right age and
right.
talking about that and talking to them about this is the proper use of alcohol. And maybe you feel a little bit dizzy and how does that feel? And what's that like? And maybe now you want to have 2 sips. As a kid gets older and older, if you don't teach that to them, and the only people that are teaching them about drinking are their chaverim in yeshiva, like, that's not, or the drunk guy in shul, that's their own example, then you're putting them at a disadvantage. Okay, so but getting to the other question, if you want, unless you want to comment on that.
No.
Getting to the other,
it's valuable information, and I think like if parents and teens are listening, I think that's a really great. That's a great piece of advice.
I don't want to be like saying anything controversial, but I think there's an appropriate age where a parent says to a kid, "Listen, I don't want you drinking in yeshiva at night. Tomorrow at the Suda on Purim, we're going to sit together and you'll have a little bit of wine. And we're going to talk about how that feels and adalo yada and what the function of that is. And as you get older, we can have a little bit more and we can learn and experience that and how that is a healthy way to do it." Now, that moderating which age that is, you know, you have to like pick ages, 17, 18, 16, 17. For sure, the older a kid is, the more appropriate it is.
Right.
You know, you don't do it with a kid that's younger. That's something for each parent. But I think there's something to be said that if you're telling your kid, let's say, not to drink in yeshiva per night, and then not saying like, but when I
drink at home,
like not to like drink indiscriminately, but like that we can have a glass of wine together at the Suda on Purim if you're 17 years old, and we'll talk about how are you feeling, which is to me, and I'm not a rabbi, but like to me probably what Chazal want from us, right? To like even get like, what does this feel to be losing your inhibition,
right?
It's not like just losing your inhibition, but what does this feel like, right? The whole idea of Purim is like this getting in touch with the fact that you can like lose sense, right? How connect with that and make that into an experiential.
Right, and it's supposed to some people, you know, it's supposed to free you from, you know, allow you to get to a higher level, a more spiritual level where you leave a lot of the stuff behind. That's and we've seen great people do that, you know.
I mean, listen, those things obviously these things are very like delicate and they have to be measured carefully and appropriate to the right situation. But it's remiss not to like say it at all, because again, that's the point that I'm trying to make. Like if you don't give kids like substance today, you've lost them, because there's so many other places for them to get. Like we used to be able to lie to kids because like they wouldn't know better. You can't lie to kids because like you said, even they're going to get misinformation, or the right information or the wrong.
I know when our kids were older teenagers, so getting into that stage, I asked Dr. Twersky. He was really mentoring me at the time. I had started, you know, he was very kind to me and gave me a great deal of time. And I once asked him, I said, you know, I asked him if he thought I did the right thing. I'll tell the boys that if I catch them drinking in somebody else's house or in a backyard from a paper bag, you know, we're going to have a real conversation. I said, if you want beer at home, tell me what you want, and I'll buy it. And that's what I did. And Dr. Twersky actually said, when people ask me this, I say, here's how I feel. Dr. Twersky is the gadol in this. He's the giant. He said that parents shouldn't allow any drinking at all. And I said, Dr. Twersky, I don't raise my children this way. You know, it's contrary. I always say I have to repeat what he said because he was a giant. But I told the kids, in fact, one of my boys told me that I used to go to 7-Eleven. Are you familiar with Muncie on College and 59? Like it's like smack in the middle of town. And I'd walk out with 2 6-packs. I'm the Menachem, you know, the head of the school. I'm walking out Friday afternoon with 2 6-packs. And so when I was at town, you know, Dad, there's a 7-Eleven on the other end of town. He recommends that I go there. He didn't want me to be embarrassed. You know, and it was actually a good opportunity to tell him something. I said, you know, this is a value for me, that you shouldn't be out there drinking, you know, out in the street or in somebody's yard or whatever. I want it in front of me with supervision. And if you have a value, you got to pay for it.
I think that the distinction there that I've had, and I've had these conversations with many parents, there's like a sense that like, well, if they're going to misbehave, it rather than misbehave at home. And I think that there's value in that argument, but there's also a deep flaw, and I'm not contradicting what you're saying, but just to make what I think. I think that at the same time, there's a necessity to model, let's say, a non-misbehavior. Meaning, if I'm letting my kid drink in my house because I know it's wrong, but I'd rather them do the wrong thing at home, that you're still sending a bad message. But if you say to a kid, like, listen, this is an unideal thing, right? It's not a bad thing. It's a normative thing. And other people might do it differently, might drink more, might drink different things. But I want to give you the opportunity to engage, and maybe this is probably what you meant. I want to give you the opportunity to engage this thing in a way that's normative and responsible.
Right. That's what I said. I said, I want you to do it here with supervision in moderation.
Right.
And that might not be easy to do if you're sitting with a bunch of buddies or you're boosting beer off somebody, you know.
Right. Right. No, I think that there's a lot to be said about that, and in that kind of more harm reduction, you might say, kind of approach. I think it's important to talk about the dangers of over drinking, but
So
getting back. Oh,
how would kids, how would, back to the original question, so how would parents be able to respond to their children and talk to them? Let me back it up a little bit. How should teenagers who are listening to this, how would you advise them to know when it's going from social drinking, just drinking in moderation, to something that's bordering on a dependency, or something that's before dependency even, that's overdone? I know you can't quantify it in cups, but so how do you explain this to people?
we just jumped from one topic to
Right,
like
correct.
totally,
Maybe I
totally.
shouldn't have. I'm
No, no,
sorry.
no, no. It's fine. I don't mind. I have to like shift my brain into a new context. How do you know when it's becoming a problem? So the one thing is when you start to do it in a way that's more abnormal, even if it seems regular, and that's got a context. I don't want to make it too complicated, but there's a big difference between what's regular and what's normative. It's perfectly normative for a child to drink with adult supervision. It's very regular for children to drink without adult supervision, right? It's very regular, but it's not normative. It's not healthy, right? Alcohol is a complicated substance, right? Knowing how much to drink, what's appropriate in the right environment is complicated. Having adult supervision, having adult guidance, being around your family who love you, who can model what's healthy, is really vital and important. The minute you start to step outside of what maybe people would call healthy, but I hate the word healthy because it seems like we're like you're healthy and I'm not healthy, but like what's kind of productive or normative or what's the word, adaptive, right? Once the further you go from that, the more likely you are to encounter kind of consequences. But more significantly, going back to what I was talking about at the beginning, one of the big consequences for young people, let's say by drinking, like most young people, like almost all young people, are not encountering like addiction with alcohol, right? Because it takes a lot to be an alcoholic, like to be like addicted to alcohol. You got to like really put the work in. You have to be very serious. You got to like you really
Put
work
the work
hard,
in.
like really addicted to alcohol. But the layers of dependency, though, are much easier to kind of identify, where you start to notice like that you have a hard time coping with emotions, feelings, circumstances, where like your first reaction to boredom, right? Boredom's a big one for kids, right? Or your first reaction to stress, or your first reaction to sadness, or your first reaction to insecurity is to rely on substance, right? To get out of oneself instead of allowing oneself to like lean in and like figure out how to show up to the party without being drunk, yeshiva, whatever, right? Or to figure out how to like sit in the boredom without like having to like, like if you can't play video games anymore without getting high, right? There's something wrong. Video games are supposed to be fun, right? And being able to like kind of notice those things and then recognize the distorted pattern, the negative pattern that's been created, I think is the most important component. And those are easy. Those are really, it just takes really a kid, a parent, an adult looking at themselves in the mirror and really be kind of like honest with themselves. Because it's not even so much whether you always do it, right? Meaning it's not so much that every time you get stressed, you drink. The question is every time you get stressed, do you think about drinking, right? That's not normal. I mean, we're all not normal, but like that's
Right.
not good. That's not where you want to be, right? The other thing is that like drinking, right, is drinking for fun is a recreation, right? When you're doing it professionally, right? When you're doing it like to kind of cope with reality, it's no longer fun. Oftentimes in life, we pretend that it's fun, right? But like if I'm drinking because I can't handle how bored I am, right? And I go to boredom because it's a big thing for kids. So it's pot or other drugs, right? Like I'm not having fun. I'm not drinking for fun. I'm drinking to cope with boredom, right? And now you're in a very kind of like
That's so interesting.
destructive phase. It's not like destructive acutely destructive in the moment. It's just like if you repeat that pattern again and again and again, you're never going to learn how to be bored. And if you never learn how to be bored, you can't really be effective at like doing like a lot of things.
Present.
Like you can't be present in the moment, you can't learn effectively, you can't study effectively, because you're always kind of looking for the thing that can get me out of myself.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting what you said, that like that if somebody has an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, for example, with substances, it's like kind of they're working at it. It's not something that they're. Is that what you're saying? It's not fun. That the drinking is not necessarily in a light way. Is that what you're saying? That it's like.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I use like a recovery like slogan, like, you know, talk about someone being a professional, but like it's an interesting like it's an interesting metaphor, because like I love what I do, right? I love the work that I do, but it's work, and it's very different than the things I do for recreation, right? In many ways, right?
Yeah.
And I come out of those things with very different feelings, right? And obviously, it's not a total complete metaphor, but that's kind of part of this. Drinking, particularly when you're doing it recreation, let's say if you're not doing it like in the context of avoda, right? But let's say you're like drinking for recreation. You're sitting around, you're drinking. It's supposed to be recreation. But like once you like need it, once you're relying upon it, you can't really call that recreation, right? Like I'll constantly laugh when I laugh with people. I try to help them understand the absurdity of it when an adult or a child says, yeah, I smoke weed recreationally every day, all day, right? That's not recreation anymore. The only one who plays basketball all day, every day is like a basketball player.
Basketball player.
They're not,
right.
not having as much fun as the rest of us because it's their job, you know,
Right.
when they're playing it professionally. It's just different, right? So like that's really where you have to kind of begin to unpack those things. That's one layer of why a young person should not be relying on drinking, even moderate drinking. It's why it's not so effective. Meaning sometimes it's really useful for a young person to like go to yeshiva on Purim and not drink, right? Even though it's difficult to like dance. You know, I remember I'll have guys come over to me like, I don't understand. How do you dance not drunk? And I'll say like, you're 32 years old. How is it so sad that you can't dance without drinking? Like, you've never allowed yourself to do that. Isn't that tragic? Like the only way you can, and it's a totally normal thing. Sometimes you want to like free those inhibitions and do those things. I'm not against that. I'm just saying to be cognizant of that and to be conscious of those things is vitally important.
I think that's a really good tool for the adolescents who are listening, is for them to understand how it could progress from something that they're doing that's fun,
right,
that's enjoyable, to something that they're doing because they want to get it done, because they want to dance and they want to enjoy themselves.
Right, and how that becomes like let's say when you want to blend the two ideas we've been talking about, like having one drink to reduce the inhibition slightly so then I can be present and dance in the way I want to, versus I need to get obliterated.
Right.
I can get on the dance floor. And that's part of the progression, right? Meaning, whereas let's say having one drink to loosen up is maybe a good thing. Having 6 drinks to get obliterated so that I can be my true self, right? Right, which is not what Chazal meant, probably, right? Right. So
I guess.
So that already is becoming more destructive. One of the interesting things, if you want to talk about like the topic of this talk today, I can stop anytime, is that like, okay, but even if you can stop, right, now what do you rely on next? Because you haven't developed the capacity to face all of those circumstances without something, right? So let's say people will have an unhealthy habituation or unhealthy kind of attachment or reliance upon one particular substance. In the addiction world, we call this cross addiction. That's how that plays out. But this plays out in all human behavior. And if you haven't kind of like trained yourself to cope, right, consciously, then like, okay, so I'll stop doing that because maybe I'm not physically or addicted to it. But then I'll just find myself transferring to something else because I haven't given myself the time and energy to learn those things. The reason why this is so valuable for young people is because young people's brains are like literally developing, which is going back to something you said before, like what's the argument about why kids should not drink? The best argument is like drinking is not bad, but you're really best off waiting until you're older.
Right, right.
It's actually best. The more you learn how to do these things, how to engage all these distress points without relying upon substance, the less likely you are, statistically speaking, to develop problems
later on.
But also, you're like putting yourself. You're kind of like, you're what's the word I'm looking for? You're handicapping yourself, right, by over relying upon even moderate levels of alcohol use at a younger age. Now, even adults have that problem, but kids for sure have that problem. So there is logic, which is one of the messages I give to kids. Like, I hear that you don't want to hear this, and I hear that there's a measure of unfairness in this, but the facts of the matter is that people at different ages have the capacity to encounter different things, and elderly people can't go skiing, can't go snowboarding, or they can, but they need to be cautious about it, yeah. Right? They get hurt much more quickly, and young people shouldn't drink, right, a lot, for sure not, and they shouldn't drink regularly. It's not good for them. It's not good for them to smoke weed. Smoking weed is a whole other thing we haven't even touched on, right, which is also destructive. And those are the facts of life. And like you said earlier, sometimes you have to just really level with kids and tell them the truth, right? Like, this is not going to, like, my pants don't have to be on fire in order for me to have this conversation with you. This is, I care about your well-being. But those kids are doing it. I hear you. And I can understand why they are. But, like, we don't have to be them. And we can have a different experience of that. And we can delay that. And you can experiment with those things later. And you can figure those things out later. We can figure them out together, right? Like when I was talking about modeling healthy drinking, right? We can work that through at a later point, right? When you say those things to kids, I'm not saying this is going to work for every kid. And it's definitely not going to work for the kid who's been traumatized or who's struggling with mental illness, right? We're not talking about...
Right. I agree.
A fairly balanced, normal kid who's not encountering the kind of stressors that come along, the normative stressors that come along with adolescence. I have found that most kids are at the very least responsive to these kind of arguments, even if whether it convinces them or not, whether they experiment and then encounter consequences and then adjust, come to parents and say, yeah, you were right, you were right. I thought like I had this figured out, but I can see now that drinking in the alleyway with my friend does lead to 2, 3, 4, because as I drink more, my inhibitions, decision making is reduced. So then 3, 4, 5 becomes more possible, right? So you were right, and I don't know if that happens every time, but it's happened enough time empirically for me to like not be able to deny it, right? It's if a kid is invested in their own well-being, then these kind of arguments, I think, are valuable. Now, what about a kid that doesn't care about themselves? That's a different conversation, right? Perfectly happy to have that conversation, but that's a totally different...
I think we really are focusing on kids that don't, God forbid, aren't suffering from any trauma, and it's just that they want to party, they want to go out and have a good time on Purim, and how can we get them messaging about doing this responsibly?
Right.
Even though they see people around them not doing that responsibly. I think what you said is really, I love what you said about this idea of explaining to them what it looks like when they go beyond that, so that in the event that they get there, they can reflect back on it and it resonates with them, what you said before.
Right.
They may not come, especially if you're their parent, they may not come and say thanks a lot, but because that's their kids. But I do think it's valuable.
The hard thing, I think, and that going back to something I said earlier, it's like the ability to have an open dialogue that says, I don't want you ever to drink. But that doesn't mean just because I don't want you to ever drink, or I don't want you to drink until you're such and such an age, right, in such and such a way. However, I'm still open to discussing it. Just because I don't want it, and just because I'm going to show my displeasure if you do it, and I'm going to be very deeply disappointed in you. And this gets into, like, I think a very important, vital skill for a parent to be able to say to a kid, like, I'm deeply disappointed in you, right? And we can also talk about it. Like, you're not a bad person, right? Like, you're not a bad kid. You did a bad thing, maybe, right? Scary thing, you made me very nervous, and I'm upset, and I'm frustrated.
Right.
And, like, you
But
know,
let's talk about it.
but let's talk about what
Right.
happened.
What
What was that?
you know? What it's interesting with technology. This obviously this addiction space I'm not that familiar with, but technology rules for schools and for kids and for homes that I am pretty involved in. And one of the things that I tell parents is that it's very similar to what you're saying, is that I tell parents that if you want this to really work, you have to have a third category. Exactly what you're describing. I call it the third category. That means that they if the kids come and you say, look, okay, you can have this phone, but you can only watch appropriate videos. Okay? So you have the 6th grade kid, and the kid comes to you twice a week and asks you, can I? Now, obviously, they're not asking you about Uncle Moshe and the Mitzvah Man.
Right.
So you wind up getting things that are kind of gray, that you're really not happy about.
Right.
So I tell parents, if your only 2 answers are yes or no, your no's are going to start piling up, and sooner or later, they just go behind your back, and they say, well, maybe I won't get caught. If I get caught, I'll deal with it, because they can't live with a no ratio of 9 to 1.
Right.
So therefore, I say, tell them it's a third category, meaning I'm not happy with it. It's not exactly what I would like you to watch, but since we're talking, you have my permission to do it.
Right.
That's exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's just different verbiage, just different words.
I think that what you're keying into is this kind of separation between yes, no, and ideal, right? It's not ideal, or
It's not ideal, right? That's what you said, right? That's what you said. I just called it third category, but yeah, not ideal is.
I think that with ourselves, I think that because a lot of this conversation, and you want to talk about parents, about how do I talk to my kids about it? Some of it is how do you talk to the kid that's inside of your head about it? Inside of your head, you're not going to be very effective. If you indulge the kid inside of your head, you're not going to be very effective. And part of, like, exactly what you said, I love the way that you put it. If everything in my life is yes and no, it's just unrealistic. It's like showing a kid a video, which I'm not against doing so, but showing them a video about the dangers of drunk driving in order to convince them never to have one beer. Like it's the same argument, right? You're lumping in so much, you end up overwhelming the no's, as opposed to inviting in the context that, like, okay, there's a gray area here, which is like, this is unacceptable, right? And this is acceptable but unideal.
Right, unideal. I like that. I like that word, unideal. I like that.
That's like kind of where we're trying to navigate. And the truth is, like, as parents, like, we're mostly in that space.
Right.
Really in that space.
Rav Dessler, I'm sorry, this is not a Rav Nachman, but Rav Dessler, Rav Dessler speaks. Are you familiar with the concept of Nekudas HaBechira?
Yes, of course.
Right.
I love Rav Dessler.
I'm sorry?
I love Rav Dessler.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he talks about a battlefield, and he gives an example, like let's say a battlefield or a soccer game. Where's the ball? Where's the action in a place? And Rav Dessler says that the theological question is, if somebody, we're not supposed to kill people, do you get rewarded for not killing someone? Right? So that's outside Nekudas HaBechira. That's not where your game is. So and the other way around, it says in Shulchan Aruch that you're supposed to get up chatzos every night, to mourn for the Beis Hamikdash, for the temple. So chatzos is coming up for you and I, right? That's not an Nekudas HaBechira right now.
Right.
So I tell Rabbeim and parents, knowing your child's Nekudas HaBechira is almost essential to talking to them, because you're going to wind up talking to them about things that are higher than the Nekudas HaBechira or lower than. You're wasting your time, and you're insulting them, because they say, you don't know. Don't. If I gave you a talk about chatzos, right? You'd say, like, do you know me? That's not there. Right. And the other way around. If I said something, so I think what you're saying is that this is where we live. The Nekudas HaBechira area is the third category, that what you call the non-ideal. That's
yeah. Well, it's a beautiful parallel. I wouldn't have thought about it that way. I like that a lot.
Then what?
Just drawing connection between the Nekudas HaBechira point of Rav Dessler and this concept of, because what Rav Dessler is saying is that we live in that space. That's where we're in battle. And it's
Right.
really very much the tzaddik is reaffirming what we're talking about, which is in our dialogue with our inner child, in our dialogue with ourself. And this gets very much into habituation and behavior.
Right.
Like where we are engaging ourselves is very much in that space of that area, that ideal, unideal space, right? That's really where we live. We live on that battlefield. Right. And oftentimes we kind of like, when we're living in these kind of black and white spaces, it's almost as if we're like invalidating the spiritual journey of life. Right. Right. Very ineffective. Right. Very real. And the nature of the life that we're in is that we can't afford to be unreal because it's so complicated. Right. Like two people having a discussion about Rav Dessler on Instagram. Right. Like it's like this is so nuanced.
And we would say that that's what it's made for, right?
My smartphone, on my iPhone, in my house, on Instagram, with you having a discussion of Dessler and like a nuance of how his Nekudas HaBechira relates to the psychology of my life, right? It's like very, like, if you told that to like our bubbies and zadies, right, in the shtetl, they would have exploded their brains.
Or some people today.
It's so nuanced, right? It's so like delicate.
But I think that's a real teachable moment, a teachable thought to really use this for this drinking. I think it's a great. I'm thinking of maybe writing it up or talking about it in a serious way. In other words, as you know, that's the beauty of you and I when we chat. We wander around and we come to some really good thinking. So if we're thinking about the drinking space, right, or technology use or anything else in life, but specifically now we're talking about Purim and drinking. So you said earlier that if you tell children that don't drink because you're going to wind up getting toasted, Rav Dessler would say, you're off your Nekudas HaBechira. That's so far away from the children. That's exactly what you said. When we first started, you said if a parent says the only argument why you shouldn't be drinking, well, the best argument is that you might get toasted. Right. So you would say, that's not in the ball field. The kid says, I'm here. I'm right here.
Well, maybe yes or maybe no. But what's funny is that if I choose to be there, what I'm saying is, which is very like disempowering to a kid, is like, I don't actually think that you care about your own well-being. And I think you're dumb enough to go drink so much
that you'll throw up and get sick.
I forbid I tell videos, which is true and dangerous, and people need to be cautious, and it's horrible. I've been literally spent hours on the streets when I was a younger social worker trying to save the world, like literally picking guys up. It's scary.
Yes, it is terrifying.
But like when you only engage your kid in that space, you're basically like saying to them, like, you're like, that's all I only see you as that.
You're over there.
If there's anything else nuanced going on here. Like I don't think that like you're grappling with like, well, Purim is about drinking and I want to fit in with my friends and they're drinking and I want to be the nerd and I want to like have a good time and I want to be the guy who's like crying to my Rebbe, right? Which is like seems like a very attractive reason to drink. Right, but like maybe there's another way to cry to your Rebbe, like the classic yeshiva guy crying to his Rebbe, right? Maybe you don't have to get drunk to do that, right? Yeah. But it's like there's so much nuance going on there, and if you don't invite the kid into that, and this is what you're saying with Rav Dessler, you're not only like saying like you're not only misplacing his Nekudas HaBechira, you're saying like you're invalidating that boy or girl
to the
like
point where it's insulting to them. Which you said that's what you started with. I remember that was basically your original marker that you put down was this concept that we shouldn't that this, and to me it's a chiddush, you know, it's news. I'm processing what you're saying. That's why I was thinking about Rav Dessler because I was thinking about what you said, something very profound that and we're not used to thinking like this. That most of us use that argument. Many and most people use that argument. Don't drink because you're going to get slammed. You're going to get toasted. And you're suggesting that we got to come up with a better reason within this this space that the kids are in, that they're not expecting to go there, but we should teach them about doing this responsibly for the right reasons, for to be able to measure themselves and see that they shouldn't get beyond that. I really have to process this. This is very good. This is very good. It's a aim based medrash b'lo chiddush. You don't get, folks don't go into a study hall without coming up with a novel thought. I know it wasn't novel for you, but it sure is novel for me in terms of thinking about this whole idea. So to encapsulate what you're saying in this point, you're suggesting that parents should frame their discussion with the children not in the place where you don't take a single drink ever, and not in the place where you're going to drink till you pass out on the floor, but rather in between, in the space where they should be, and teach them to make good choices within that. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what?
To acknowledging the fact that they are complex. Drinking is complex, right? And even to point out, like, oh, look, sometimes it's drinking that's good, and it's very obvious when it's good. And sometimes it's drinking that's very bad, and it's very bad. There's also like education about the fact that some people, drinking doesn't work for them, which is another thing that if you want to get into the addiction space, like that's like, like there are people that for which drinking, even with all the best efforts in the world, it just doesn't, work for them, right? They can't drink effectively. It doesn't come natural to them. It's just a reality. So it's really presenting them with all those facts. Part of it is also the realization, and it's funny because like really we could talk about this all year. And not only could we talk about drinking, we could talk about this in the context of like so many things. But Purim comes, and it's only natural that we talk about these things. But so part of what it is for parents and children, if we're speaking to both of them, right, and children that like are invested in their own well-being, who are wondering like, should I drink, should I not drink, right? And parents who are open to having those dialogues, and those are the people that are watching, are people that want to have kind of is like, this is a really good opportunity to have a conversation. Like your kid's exposed to drinking all year long. Right? Purim's, though, a really good time to actually have the conversation about what good drinking and not good drinking, or what healthy or not healthy or not adaptive, what the dangers are, why it's different for an adult than for a child, right? What over drinking looks like, and how we have to be careful about falling into a trap that could lead to over drinking, because the dangers that are associated with that, which are not unreal, by the way. And
of course. I
validated that a bunch of times, but I can't validate it enough. Like, and kids are impulsive, and they lack choices, and therefore that's why, even more so, why it needs to be best if younger people.
What you said about the age was also very wise.
17, right? Whatever that is, I think that's like a good age to start thinking about it. But like if you're trying to help them gain context, you want to do so around adults that care about them. And sure. So like we talked about, and part of that is like there's a certain rite of passage that comes. And instead of kind of ignoring it, like the way that it was when I was younger, the rite of passage was getting slammed, right? That's the rite of passage. And like we have the opportunity to like shift the dynamic, and the rite of passage is to drink
responsibly.
Oh, it's time to talk about it. You're notice that other people drink. If your kid noticing that other people are drinking, that's usually means it's time to talk about it.
Right, exactly.
Age appropriate way, and that's a rite of passage. That's an opportunity
to
talk. And I think that it's important for parents to do that, and to like see like this is what Hashem wants from me right now, to face this challenge. This is what's on my kid's mind, instead of like hiding from it or being terrified of it.
Menachem, always a pleasure. This was really great. I'm serious. You really got me thinking.
Okay, good.
And thank you very much. I hope other folks will gain as much as I did from it. Menachem, keep up your amazing work.
Thank you.
And look forward to reading your new book.
Thank you.
Acceptance.
Thank you. That Acceptance.
Is it out already?
It's. I
saw like just some galleys.
Yeah, days away. Thank God.
Days away. Oh, it should be with Mazel and Bracha.
It's like coming out of the publisher. It'll be in Eretz Yisrael soon, faster.
That's great. Well, we hope to be there for Pesach. I'll bring you back a couple of copies. Menachem, be well. Thank you so very much for your time, and keep up your amazing work.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thanks. Take care.